Climb into the cockpit with pilot and Link Square's Chief Legal Officer, Tim Perilla, as he invites legal leaders aboard to share advice that will help you navigate even the most turbulent times of in-house counsel work. We'll cover a range of topics from data privacy to legal team structure to public company transactions and beyond. You don't want to miss this series. Fasten your seatbelt and prepare for takeoff. You're listening to Cockpit Counsel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Cockpit Counsel. My name's Tim. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Link Squares. As always, we have our producer, Alyssa Verzino. And if you like our podcast, give us a subscribe, give us a follow on all the socials, and let's get right into it. So today we have Robert Ball. Robert Ball is the Chief Legal Officer at Enlace Health. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
So we start every show the same way. It is a pilot theme show.
Yep.
What is your pre-flight ritual?
Pre-flight,
like non-metaphorically.
I get it. No, I actually have one, and I was thinking about that because I used to travel around the world a lot. So I literally sort of think about how long I'm going to be gone. What do I have to dress for when I get there? What's the weather?
Right.
And then I kind of start from the head and go to the toe.
Yeah.
You know, how many of these belts, pants,
right.
shoes, the whole bit, just sort of walk through a check there, pre-flight check before I walk out the door. So I hate to check bags. So I've been known to go around the world, 6 days or 10 days in 6 countries and not check a bag. So you got to be very efficient about that. So
that's exactly right. I always go through my morning routine. I'm always like worried I'm going to like forget some toiletries or whatever it is, right? And just like go in order and like, all right, what are all of the things that I actually touch in a morning and then evening routine basis, and then go through the clothing. I always overpack on the clothing though.
There you go.
That's a toxic trait. All right, so you've got an incredible background, really interesting career. Would love to have you just give a quick sort of highlight of what your career path has been and what you're doing now.
So it is a bit tortured and twisted as you go along. I actually got out of college. I was a CPA, and being a CPA for 2 years drove me to law school.
Yeah.
So
you like punishment?
Yeah, I finally figured out what I wanted to be when I grew up and what I like to do, and it's solve puzzles. So I think that's a constant theme that I finally figured out. But so went to law school, got out, went with a big national firm, King & Spalding, doing M&A work and IPOs and all the
Atlanta.
In Atlanta, yeah. And so that went through that, and then decided I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. So spent a little time with a small firm, and then really bumped up against what sort of area of work I should specialize in. And most lawyers back then didn't like software, didn't like technology. And most of the people looking for lawyers were younger, so they didn't have a 20-year relationship with a law firm.
Right.
So it kind of started to work that way. And then in the mid-'90s, this thing came along called the internet, and I thought it was pretty daggone cool. So I jumped on board on that because, again, people were trying to figure out what to do there, and most lawyers were like, there's no precedent, there are no forums I can go to. I thought it was great. There was no way you could really create do a malpractice because there were no rules of the road, so we were making it up as we went along.
Yeah.
And
it's
that
also nothing for you to hide behind.
No, it wasn't. But,
it separates the good lawyers from the not so great ones.
Well, hopefully so. And so that kind of led to suddenly helping write some of the e-commerce legislation. I was then helped found the Internet and E-commerce group at Alston & Bird, another big firm. Yeah. Next thing I knew, moving the family to D.C. to be more of a national practice. And then started representing a startup up here, MIT-based startup called Akamai Technologies.
I've heard of them.
And there were 13 people at the company and no paying customers. That was in March. By August, I was joining them as General Counsel, and first day of work was the IPO org meeting. So
wow.
Took it public in October of '98.
Yeah.
And then we started to grow. $4 million in revenue the first year, $92 million the next year, $160 the next. It was pretty crazy. Yearning to kind of be on the business side, I jumped over and started the business and corporate development team there.
Okay.
So I actually gave up the GC job.
Yeah.
And went there, and part of that was opening up the international side of Akamai.
Yep.
And then eventually went, you'll appreciate this as a lawyer, went to the dark side, went to the sales and marketing side
All
of the
right.
company.
Yeah.
But
That's the fun side.
oh, it was fun side. Yeah.
Yeah.
So ended up running all the international operations, which at that time was primarily 6 countries, 3 in Europe and 4 in Asia, or 3 in Europe, 3 in Asia.
Nice.
So traveling a lot, doing that.
Yeah.
Then left Akamai, took some time off, got jumped in on a few startups. Ended up in the cybersecurity business with Ionic Security, which was down in Atlanta. Sold that to Twilio. Hung around a while, hooked up with the folks at Enlace Health as their general counsel. Came all the way back to, I really like being, I'm very comfortable and like being in that lawyer consigliere
Yeah, sure.
role. And so that's where I am now. So again, a bit twisted, but that's how we got there.
That's awesome. That's fun. How so interesting, an accountant by trade. How do you think that's helped you? And one of the things we'll get into here is talking about deals and that deal process, how to best approach it, things like that. But how has being an accountant really shaped your perspective?
You know, I think again, the numbers don't lie, and they really guide things. And what you also know, and you know this being in an earlier stage company, you're run by the numbers, and you got to operate the company by the numbers. You have to have a product, and you have to have product market fit, and you have to have people using your product and service to get value out of it.
Right.
But ultimately, the way you're going to grow the company is to grow, get that profitable revenue growth, grow the top line, get to EBITDA positive, get to the holy grail of cash flow positive, and move into that next phase. So having those fundamentals and also being aware that there are accounting and finance impacts to what you do, either on the legal side or the business side, I think is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I think a lot of the like being able to bring. So I was a finance undergrad, and through most of my career reported to accountants, which has been great. So I've been in house my whole career, and with the exception of Link Squares here, I've reported to the CFO.
Gotcha.
Which has been incredible, because all of the direction that you're given, almost by its very nature, has that lens of like what happens financially and from an accounting perspective. And so I learned more about finance and accounting in the first 4 or 5 years of my career than I did in my undergraduate degree. Right. But it's important that the lawyers, I think, have at least some fundamental level of understanding as to how the provisions in their agreement can impact the financial statements.
Sure.
And the revenue recognition and things like that. Because very rarely do the salespeople have any idea about that.
Right. And the way you draft that contract and the way you negotiate that contract can have severe or significant effects on RevRec for sure.
Absolutely. And so, when you think about, I know we talked a little bit about it, but let's get into the art of the deal, so to speak. We've got a lot of folks who listen in who are relatively early on in their in-house careers.
Yep.
Would love like just some initial pieces of advice when you walk into a deal. What are the first few things that you look at?
I mean, again, I think that you really have to walk into a deal, especially as an in-house counsel, understanding the business that you're there for, because you aren't, unlike being with a law firm where you might be just confined to doing the legal side of it. And of course, the way law firms bill kind of helps self-constrain that. But you need to understand the business, and you need to understand the goals of the business and why is that the business entering into this deal or that deal. Just beyond the T's and C's, the terms and conditions that you're being asked to negotiate, so that whatever you're putting together comes out that way. And quite often, you're especially in an earlier stage company, the lawyers on the other side are with a large company, so you're sitting there with limited negotiating leverage.
Right.
And so you're going to face quite a lot of, well, this is the way we always do it, so therefore you should accept it. And so I've always found that if you understand the business and the technology and how to use that technology, then you have an advantage, because quite often the people on the other side don't have that level of knowledge or desire to know. So
Yeah, exactly. And I think, obviously depending on the company, like that leverage mismatch is something to be very aware of, and I think it makes it that much important to try to find those little pieces of leverage.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's not through the lawyers.
that's right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. You have to know when to kind of, pull the plug and say, I need a little, I need you to come in here and make the argument there. And then the other piece, I think the other advice I would give is, and this chapter and verse, it's an oversimplification, but not by much. There are typically two types of lawyers out there. They're deal makers and deal breakers.
Yep.
And so are you there? And you're not working for the company. The company wants you to protect them legally, and that's your
right.
job. But the company does not want you to prevent the company from growing and achieving its goals.
Yep.
So you have to take that mentality, and you have to do it with the lens of, I'm here to protect the company, but I'm not here to prevent the company from getting something done.
That's right.
So
one of the things that I think about in going through a negotiation, really at any level, is what I try to impress on the salespeople and on the rest of the folks around the business is, and it's actually one of the values at LinkSquares, is do what you say.
Yep.
Like that's where you start getting into trouble, is when you start committing to things that you either have no intention of doing,
Right.
or are just completely underestimating the complexity
Yep.
of fulfilling those obligations. And
Yep.
I think that's where lawyers can be really helpful. Is like, okay, wait, what are we actually prepared to do here?
Right. And as an earlier stage company, quite often there's pressure to when a potential customer comes in and says, can your product or service do this? Is the tendency to say, well, we can make it do that, and that can get you in a world of hurt in very fast order.
So I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction and probably go completely against 90% of what we talk about on this.
Okay.
And probably against like 90% of the stuff that I post on LinkedIn as well. But when you see a deal that is a bad deal, it's a bad business deal.
Right.
What is your approach to talking the business through that?
Is this where I say my views don't reflect those of Enlace Health? No.
Yes.
No, I think
we'll have a
that
big disclaimer.
big disclaimer there at the end.
It's a voiceover for David.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think when you see a bad deal, I think part of it is you figure out, are there elements that you can help make it a better deal? Is there a deal to be done in here? And I think you owe it to the company to figure out if that's it. And most every time, and I've been in that situation, we've all been there, you want people will come to that conclusion. It will, if you keep asking the questions and you're going through and you're being thorough. If it's a bad deal, it's gonna come out. The ones that I think are tougher sometimes are the bad deals that don't appear as a bad deal in the beginning.
Yes.
And then as you're kind of going through the process, you start to see. And bad deal may be bad deal terms. I know back in the day I did some outsourcing deals, and quite often you would reduce it to two potential outsource partners, and you'd start negotiations with both sides just to see.
Just play them against each other.
And also to see how that was going to go.
Right.
Because I think the other thing, one of the benefits from having done the business side and the going all the way through to sales and marketing and business development, I think back to one of the things I learned at Akamai. One of the reasons I got out of being the lawyer and did the business development is I was asked to go set up a partnership in Australia, New Zealand, and Australasia, and Singapore. And then once we set the deal up, my deal lawyer hat said, "Well, I'm done." And the CEO of the company said, "No, you're just getting started."
Yeah.
So I think it gives you a perspective that, we as lawyers, a lot of times we think, well, once the ink's dry on the contract, our work is done.
Right.
And you have to have a mentality and a thought process that really, for the business, that's day one.
Yeah.
And so if you do that, and again, indirectly answering your question, that's where you have to think about a deal and is it a good deal or a bad deal, not just in terms of the deal terms you're working for, but what is it you can glean from that interaction that then you can pass back to the company to let them see that, well, if we can somehow get some deal terms that we can live with, it may still not be the best outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I've had a couple of circumstances where, a prior business leader was like, well, I want this deal, but this is going to be a nightmare working with these people.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, it is, but
it is.
I get it. Like, you want the deal. And I found that one of the more difficult things is when people do have that different expectation, right? I think as like at the outset, right? Like one side thinks the deal's going to be one thing, the other side,
right?
It's like, well, yeah, like that's what we want the outcome to be, but that's not necessarily what we're going to provide you.
Right.
Right. And you start to get into like the facts, and people are like, well, wait, you won't do that. You won't do that. You won't do that. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Right. And it starts to erode some of that deal lust and really get down. But it also highlights, highlights what the business people need to talk about. Like, that's where I started thinking about it. I'm like, all right, I've got two roles. Either number one, you got to focus on making sure the legal terms are correct.
Yes.
Number two is making sure that on the business side, the outcome that the business is expecting from the agreement is somehow tied to those business,
as
those
best
business,
you can.
Obligations.
Right.
So,
and if you can't, then you try and put it in the agreement. And if you can't get in the agreement and they still want the deal done, you make sure that everybody knows that there's some gaps there that are going to have to be closed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've all seen the deal that finally did get done, and then the post-deal problems that arise that then have people coming back and saying, why did we go in that deal in the first place?
Yeah. We've also seen the other side of it, though. Like, it tends to be a progression where, like, the first deal in that category is a garbage deal, and you just learn a lot. And you're like, okay, this is how we want to move forward.
Yeah, and if that's what you're
these
going to
types of vendors,
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
so you saw tremendous growth at Akamai. How big was your team when you left? So you were the first GC there.
I was the first GC there. By the time I switched over to business development, I think there were 11 of us.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome. That's a great sized team. How did you manage the team's reputation as being good deal makers there?
I think it was really advising people to listen and again, understand the business and why they were there. Had some extremely talented lawyers that came in who had all come from law firms. May have had one or two that had been in-house before, but by and large, they came in from law firms. So the first thing was understand the business, understand the goals of the business and what we need to do, and listen and make sure. And then, work with each other to make sure that we were leveraging all the knowledge that we could then generate, and understanding the personalities that we were dealing with internally, because they weren't all the same.
Yeah, exactly. Building that relationship with the other parts of the business is so critical.
And then also kind of taking a load off of them when back to your point, when you have to go beyond where you run into a problem, either with a potential customer, potential vendor, or the internal person you're dealing with is, let me take that, and then you focus on what you need to do. So being an escalation point there.
Yep, exactly.
Nice. And we talk a lot on Cockpit Counsel about career advice when you're starting a new job and new company. How would you advise somebody for the first 30, 60, 90 days joining a fast-paced startup?
Again, I think it just starts with, we have two of these and one of these for a reason. So it's listen and learn and really get in there and understand what you're getting into. And quite frankly, understanding from the board and the CEO and the investors what the expectations are. Where is this company and what is not only the 30, 60, 90, but how does that 30, 60, 90 fit into the 6-month, 12-month, 18-month? And you just have to really think. I think if you're coming from a law firm, you've been very tactical and very task oriented, and to be part of a management team in the general counsel of a firm, you're now part of the part of the executive team, and you have to think much more strategically, and you have to be thinking about where that puck's going to be and how you fit into that. So you can't just deal with it. You have to deal with the here and now, but you have to deal with the here and now within the context of where you're going to. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. And thinking about having a strategic mindset and then also being a leader within the company and for the legal team, how do you think about building out a team from the start if maybe it's a lean legal team?
Yeah, I think you start off, I mean, again, cash is king in any startup, even if you've just raised a big round. So you have to be very, I think, frugal from the get-go. So you have to figure out, how can I leverage an outside law firm for employment law at a point in time until suddenly I need to bring somebody in-house. Because once you bring somebody in-house, now you have a full-time employee, and they may not be as agile as you are. They may be a specialist in one area. So you may be you have to become more of a generalist as that general counsel. So you have to bring in the specialist for different areas. And you have to figure out at what point in time the capacity internally for the company will support a specialist in an area. So I always like to hire, and I use a number of law firms because I have relationships in different law firms for different specialties. So I don't think necessarily just picking one law firm and then hoping they'll then allocate it out. You have to think strategically, but then you have to come all the way back to being that very detail-oriented, down in the minutia lawyer to make sure you cover that. And that applies to whether you're negotiating a contract or trying to hire people to help you support.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any tips for managing relationships with outside counsel on that note?
Again, I think transparency and just understanding. Hourly rates are high, and so you can consume them. So I think having I've got some great relationships with outside counsel where if we're going into something that is to scope out, what is this going to cost me? How long is it going to take? In broad strokes, I'm not asking all the time for a fixed quote, but I need to know because, again, I got to go back to my CFO. I may have a legal budget, but that can get eaten up in one or two sideways conversations or a potential dispute or something you didn't anticipate coming in. So you have to manage it very tightly as you go through that.
I think we could probably talk for hours about managing outside counsel. But,
Yeah.
I think one thing that's important, and it was always early on in my career, it was strange to me talking to big law and people. Like, I really had to press people to get even just a ballpark estimate on something. Yep. And then, as you go farther and farther along, you actually, most often, lawyers who have done the work before know how much it's going to cost.
Yeah.
I can tell you exactly how much a top 10 law firm is going to charge me to fully draft brief a motion to dismiss.
Yep.
12B6, right? You know probably within 10% of what it's going to be.
And they should.
And they should know too. And I think that's the important thing for attorneys who are early on is go and find some other mentors who can just be like, it should be about this. If anyone tries to tell you it's completely unforeseeable and any number of things could happen, they're probably just going to charge you way too much.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then lastly, do you have any productivity or prioritization tips for somebody that's in a fast-paced environment, just starting out?
That can be a tough one. I think you have to prioritize, and you have to have a lot of self-discipline because at least the way I've always practiced law is it's sort of like an emergency room physician. It's triage. So somebody comes in, they're bleeding, you start helping them out. And if you are a one-man band like I am right now, you have to juggle things and you have to look at your day and look at, I know that's urgent, but this is urgent too, and how do I prioritize that? And I think you have to set aside part of your day for things that you didn't think of when you walked in the morning, because it will happen. So, and then you have to work it and be ready to work the hours and just like make sure it gets done. So
I think you got to enjoy it too, right? The variety is
absolutely.
great.
Yeah.
Variety is awesome.
Yeah.
Real quick before we move on, you had mentioned just quickly dealing with the board. Throughout your career, how have you seen your relationships or your approach to the relationship with the board change?
I think it's I've had some great fortune to have some great interactions with boards and have boards that and worked with management teams and CEOs that really put a lot of on me and faith in me to help manage that board. And I've always enjoyed working with the board and giving them advice. I think it's they are there in a supervisory capacity for the most part, so they are looking to you and the other members of management. So I think it's just like they're looking at the CFO to understand not only what the accounting says, but the finance and the strategic aspects of the finance, or the CTO or the product leaders, or HR, et cetera. I think you have to know that they're looking at you not only for how you might negotiate the terms and conditions of a contract, but also what is the legal landscape? What are the pitfalls we have to watch out for? What are the areas of opportunity that we can leverage? And again, I've been in cybersecurity, I've been in internetworking, I'm in healthcare technology now, so highly regulated industries. Been in fintech, where there's a lot of highly regulated industries where you have to be aware of evolving aspects. I work with a national coalition of CISOs, the National Technology Security Coalition. So there's a policy aspect of educating Congress in breach notification laws and privacy laws and all the landscape that's going on there. And so you have to also be aware of that. So in dealing with the board, you become a bit of an advisor there. And quite often you can ask the board, especially if they're institutional investors with a venture firm, what resources they have that they can lend to you as well, which they are more than happy to do. Yeah. Because they've got, and they don't mind getting another portfolio company to connect with you and provide somebody you can talk to.
Yeah.
So I think
and they get excited by that. They're like, "Oh,
yeah.
cool! I can."
You actually care about the business. And
Yeah.
no, I think you do it because it doesn't. You don't get billed by the hour for that.
Right.
So I think you really do want to interact with the board and leverage their expertise and bring your expertise to them. So
That's right.
Awesome. That's great advice. Well, we end every episode with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So if you're ready, what is your hot take on working in-house?
Hot take on working in-house is, I think, as you said, you kind of embrace the chaos and you love the fact that you're part of the business and you're part of building something. That was really what inspired me to jump in-house, was to be part of building something. Akamai was two people who came up with an idea to solve the hotspot problem on the internet. And out of that came a company today that's multi-billion in revenue and employs all these people and solves all this problem. And that's just fascinating to me.
That's very cool. What's your number one tip for running an effective legal team?
Again, it's prioritize and be flexible and ready to react, and understand that much like if you're an outside counsel, your day is not necessarily yours. So you have to understand that you are there to serve and to be part of that company and not the other way around. So
that's great. What is the best career advice that you have ever given or received?
That's hard. I've gotten some great career advice. I would say that one of it is more on, there's certainly a fit for being an in-house counsel or being in any role. And it was an investor who said that one of the things you always want to make sure when you invest in a company or you sit on a board or you work for that company, that you understand that everyone who's at the table understands the goals of what needs to be done and that those align. Because if you go in thinking that your goal and being part of this company is this way and the primary investors or the CEO or some other influential folks in there have a totally different mindset, it can go sideways in a hurry. So just make sure you understand where that's going. So that was great advice.
And finally, what is a charity or a cause that's close to your heart that you would want all of our listeners to check out and that we can amplify?
I lost my mother to dementia, Alzheimer's, and the long goodbye over a number of years to go through that. It's a horrible, horrible disease that anything you can do, anything we can do to help solve or at least fix that as we live longer, it's something we all should look at and get involved with. So,
absolutely. Well, Robert, thanks so much for joining us. It was great to catch up. Awesome
Likewise.
Conversation. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.